Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Koyo Kouoh, and I warmly welcome you to the Radical Solidarity Summit. And of course, I first will have to start with giving thanks. I really want to give thanks to every single speaker, every single participant of this week-long program for their adhesion and contribution to this effort. It really means a lot to us to have had the opportunity and the possibility to gather such an illustrious lineup of critical voices. I'm also want to sincerely thank the entire team at Zeitz MOCAA, and particularly the curatorial team, as well as the communication team, for their dedication and investment in putting together this timely event. You really did an amazing job. We also owe gratitude to the South African Department for Sports, Arts and Culture for their support towards this online project. We also owe thanks to our co-founders, the V&A Waterfront, who's hosting us on their Zoom platform. Over the next 5 days, we will explore the notion of solidarity through different angles. The summit begins today with a transgenerational discussion on the historic legacies of resistance and the ongoing struggle for Black liberation through the context of Pan-African solidarity. Day 2 examines the development of robust publication cultures, including both print and online platforms, as well as other methods of knowledge transmission. Day 3 looks at practices of collaboration and collectivity, while Day 4 will ask critical questions related to space, urbanism, and mobility, and its impact on imaginaries. The event concludes with a review of radical artistic and theoretical practice in relation to solidarity. The program is presented in form of discursive talks, a performance, films, screenings, and readings. In honor of this event, we are handling our media platform, particularly our Instagram account, for the duration of the summit to Black Star Line Kumasi. Black Star Line is an experimental incubator of contemporary art and sharing community based in Kumasi in Ghana. In April this year, we launched a program of Instagram conversations called Head to Head. This program was a moment to speak with key players of our field as a means to stay connected, as well as an opportunity during this pandemic to provide a platform of discussion about how we are navigating these indeed unsettling times. During one of these conversations, I uttered the idea that if COVID-19 is revealing many things that we already knew with regards to politics, healthcare, social justice, and the neoliberal economy, it also offers the chance of rethinking what solidarity could mean for the cultural sector. Even in mid-February, nobody could have imagined that just a few weeks down the line, the world would drastically change in terms of mobility, gathering, widespread social unrest, and sweeping delusion. The idea of this summit emerged in May, as we were adjusting to the realities that were surfacing. The fundamental question underlying this initiative arose. What can we do for ourselves? What can we do for others? What can we do together? The first thing we did for ourselves is to secure all jobs at the museum, as opposed to immediate layoffs that we all saw happening across the industry. And I have to say, with shock. We all accepted substantive salary cuts to maintain a certain level of sustainability in the face of the financial crisis that the pandemic plunged us into. As a young museum, our identity is still a work in progress. We all know that institutional identities take time to establish. They are in continuous flux and are largely shaped by their surroundings. In the case of Zeitz MOCAA, one can say we made sure to enlarge the span of our surroundings to include the entire continent as well as its diaspora. For some, this might seem a mouthful. For us, it is an urgent necessity to take the groundbreaking initiative that is Zeitz MOCAA as a foundation to write new chapters of our art historical narrative. I reckon that many may question what is radical about an online summit and what kind of solidarity an organization such as Zeitz MOCAA can actively put in motion. When I joined the museum early last year, one of my first concerns was to bring a degree of institutional humility and to extend an invitation to my colleagues in the field to practice togetherness. It was important for me to bring the initial hubris in check, to put the cart behind the horse, so to speak. Zeitz MOCAA is not the first museum on the continent. It is certainly not the first museum in South Africa either. However, it is definitely the first museum that sets out to present, collect, and engage with the artistic and intellectual production in a Pan-African and Afro-diasporic scale. As the new kid on the block, we know that we are under extreme scrutiny, and rightly so. Nonetheless, the call for this museum has been roaring in the field of contemporary art in Africa for more than 2 decades. The most explicit manifestation of this roaring call is undoubtedly the sprawling work, The Museum of Contemporary African Art by Beninese artist Meshack Gaba. You see a slide of an installation shot of one small segment of Meshack's amazing work. The best art initiatives are meant to reflect their time. They are also a reflection of a zeitgeist and a necessity. The landscape of contemporary art on the continent has drastically changed over the last 2 decades, with the establishment of independent spaces across the continent and the emergence of savvy and utterly engaged art professionals. Zeitz MOCAA largely benefited from the work that all these organizations, small and big, did and continue to do in mediating our artistic capital. We are very aware of the immense task that we set ourselves up to. We are just as aware of the high expectations that our audience and stakeholders have of us. I personally believe in organic growth, a growth that is informed by locality, immediacy, and adjacency. I also strongly believe in continuous checking in with the aims and objectives of any given endeavor. As a museum, we are part of a large ecosystem that is dependent on mutuality and plurality. In preparing for this week, I revisit a few texts on solidarity. One in particular rang bells in my head. I'm speaking about the Salvador Allende Solidarity Museum, arguably the only museum institution whose subject matter is solidarity itself. What sustains this museum is obviously the concept of cultural solidarity that has roots reaching back to the 1950s. The permanency of the concept of solidarity in the field of the arts and culture echoes the fact that solidarity is a fundamental dimension of life. A museum like Zeitz MOCAA cannot thrive without the inclusion of its civic role in the work of rebuilding the concept of citizenship, political engagement, and social awareness. Yet, in my opinion, solidarity is very much like boycott. For it to have meaning, it must cost one something. One has to pay the price for it, like two of the speakers I will be speaking to later. In our digital age, though, solidarity can be easily performed from the comfort of a smart device and appease one's mind that you've done something. Since the pandemic occurred, many professionals are asking people in what they perceive as so-called solid, stable, and wealthy art institutions, what they are doing for artists. I like to flip this question around and rather ask, what are artists doing for institutions that promote them? I flip this question around for a few reasons. One is that the question suggests that all artists are in need of support. This is not true. There are many artists who are doing very well, even in times of crisis. Second, the question also suggests that all artists have no agency nor systems of sustainability to carry them through rough times. And third, I certainly do not agree with the 2 points I mentioned above. Hence the flip of my questions. What can artists do for institutions such as museums, art centers, and not-for-profit galleries? Where the activity of an artist might be stalled due to various cancellations, and loss of income, the fundamental existence of an institution such as a museum is at high risk, considering that the livelihoods of hundreds of staff members depend on its very existence. It is currently estimated that 1/3 of museums globally will never reopen again. They are gone forever, for good. And very close to home, we are witnessing the agonizing cry of such an important and necessary institution like the District 6 Museum in Cape Town. There are many more that are struggling in silence, being starved from our livelihoods, which are humans visiting, gathering, experiencing, and celebrating. This honestly really breaks my heart. The pandemic has intensified the general call for care, for healing, for humility, and for solidarity that artists and art professionals have been practicing from times immemorial. In the past decade, we have witnessed protests unfolding into serious unrest across the globe and particularly on the continent. The African Revolt, which I refuse to call the Arab Spring, I call it the African Revolt. The African Revolt of 2010, initiated in Tunisia by a simple fruit vendor, spread across the Maghreb like a bushfire. After initial excitement, this new wave of voicing political demands, instead of genuine reforms and change, what we see is the reinforcement of violence and the denial of personal liberties. I believe the alternative to calling such demands is to live in a state of permanent agitation and the spirit of radical solidarity. The term radical solidarity is one that we at Zeitz MOCAA have ruminated ever since I uttered it in that said conversation a few months ago. Internally, we have deliberated, debated, and dissected the meaning of this term as we imagine all the possible ways that radical solidarity could manifest itself in our work. Many associate the term radical with extreme reforms that shift the fundamental nature of things, while the word solidarity brings to mind fellowship, unity, and shared conviction amongst people. However, radicality does not always need to be loud and extreme. The silent, subtle, and steady defiance of any given state of affairs can be just as radical as the loudest protest. Solidarity, on the other hand, calls for commitment, a dedication that reveals itself through action. In addition, in my opinion, for solidarity to be effective, it has to come at a cost. It's like boycott. If it doesn't cost you anything, it has no meaning. Solidarity also implies the condition of living under a constant drive for care, consciousness, and sensitivity to the matters that surround us. The aim is working through them and adapting to the ever-growing complexity and abstraction that contemporary modes of producing, exchanging, and communicating bring into existence. According to my esteemed colleague, the Egyptian curator and thinker Bassam El-Baroni, I quote, "A widespread tendency established in a culture of critique of art and curatorial practice responds to the primacy of the organizational by employing it to produce open frameworks of interaction." End of quote. Here we see that the artistic space is the provider of a framework that allows us to indulge in a form of pseudo-egalitarian openness. And I really insist on the pseudo. As we are invested in shifting the initial narrative of Zeitz MOCAA, we reach out to you, all of you attending this summit throughout this week, in spirit of solidarity to contribute to the making of this museum. The African continent and its vast diaspora are certainly not novice to ideas of radical solidarity. We build upon foundations laid before us. On the bedrock of radical movements such as Negritude, civil rights, Pan-Africanism, anti-apartheid, Black consciousness, and countless others that may have had very localized but still pertinent provocations. These earlier forms of solidarity were catalysts for notable arts gatherings such as the 1956 and the 1958 Congress of Black Writers and Artists in Paris and Rome, the MOCAA Writers Conference in Uganda, where Great Wole Soyinka expressed his Negritude as an opposition to Senghor's Negritude, the first International Congress of African Culture in Zimbabwe in 1962, the 1966 World Festival of Negro Arts, FESMAN in Dakar, the Pan-African Cultural Festivals in Algiers in 1969, the Black Music Festival held in conjunction with the Rumble in the Jungle boxing match between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1974, the second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, FESTAC in Nigeria in 1977, the Art Contra Apartheid touring exhibitions in the late 70s to the early 80s, and countless more. In our daily practice, we are contributing to the continuum of critical discourse, and our present time definitely calls for radical solidarity. There is no way we can survive this situation. I call the pandemic the situation. This situation ex nihilo. The global pandemic has exposed and widened existing societal disparities. For once, we may all be in the same storm. However, we are kept afloat by different vessels. Some are in big, large barges, while others are clinging onto rafts, almost drowning. The COVID-19 pandemic represents a forced deacceleration, as critical African thinkers have long been calling for. It also prompts hope for a more moral cultural order, if not world order altogether. With this crisis as a backdrop, we have heard the intensified call for for justice, restitution, and healing. Recently, discussions around repatriations of African material culture have also intensified. There is a problematic history of cultural violence associated with the ways in which African objects were stripped away from the continent. Conversations around their return are often sadly still marred by patronizing undertones questioning our ability to care for them. This is despite the mushrooming of cultural institutions across the continent. Today's discussions around institutional identity and culture should encourage those working on the continent to continue the inquisition of our own regimes, especially those that mimic, reflect, and reference old discriminatory infrastructure. Zeitz MOCAA has been the object of these exact critiques due to its ill inception and in its initial institutional arrogance. Solidarity requires sensibility and institutional humility. This means that as we witness what is happening around us, we must also make room for organizational introspection. How does one become an inclusive, sensitive, and caring organization? This is the question that is driving us ever since I joined the museum. Radical solidarity requires us to move away from the convenience of sanitized presentations of history to offer more balanced and more complicated narratives. Solidarity can also mean just connecting with those who have similar missions for the development of the arts on the continent. In thinking about the meaning of radical solidarity, I am thankful that art and artists continue to offer us a rethinking of and understate the story in profound ways. Our upcoming solo exhibitions by Senzeni Maracela, Alfredo Jarre, and Tracy Rose will open dialogue around memory, history, power, Blackness, feminism, and justice. They will give us unconventional methods of making meaning and continuing important dialogue by creating work that speaks to the essence of who we are becoming as an institution and how we can make this museum a site of advocacy and critical engagement. One of the objectives of the summit is to close on Friday with a catalogue of ideas that will be driven by you, as we wish for this museum to become artist and community-led. And this is not just a slogan. We really want to work towards that. This afternoon, I have the incredible privilege to converse about what I said before with two heavyweights whose work and incisive thinking has enormously contributed to the understanding of the political tension of Africa, in the case of Achille Mbembe, and for a deeper knowledge of the political complexities of South Africa, in the case of Albie Sachs. Two outstanding individuals for whom I have the boundless admiration, who have not only continuously provided solidarity through their political work, but who have also suffered the cost of being engaged in critical and political struggles for the continent. So in keeping with our tradition of respecting the elders, I will begin by introducing Albie Sachs, whom I think doesn't need any introduction anymore, but just very quickly. Albie is many, many things, but Albie is first and foremost, an active, open, engaged thinker. Albie Sachs is a South African activist and the former judge of the Constitutional Court of South Africa from 1994 to 2009. Albie Sachs went into exile where he completed a PhD from Sachs University. When he returned to South Africa from exile, he served as a member of the Constitutional Committee and the National Executive of the African National Congress. Albie Sachs played a pivotal role in the 1990 democratic negotiations and was appointed at the Constitutional Court in 1994 by former President Nelson Mandela. He was also central to the formation of the 1996 post-apartheid constitution, the amazing South African constitution that many other African countries should be totally envious of, is one of his hard work. Sachs is the author of a number of books, including Stephanie on Trial, 1968, The Jail Diary of Albie Sachs, 1996, Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter, 1990, The Strange Alchemy of Life and Law, 2009, and We the People, Insights of an Activist Judge. In addition, Sachs has received numerous accolades over the years for his writing. He received the Alan Paton Award for both Soft Vengeance and The Strange Alchemy of Life and Law in 2010. The Jail Diary of Albie Sachs in 1978 was drafted by David Edgar for the Royal Shakespeare Company and televised by the BBC. What all these official, very clean bios don't say about the person is the whole human dimension behind a figure like Albie Sachs. Albie is an amazing host. When I moved to Cape Town last year, Albie and his wonderful wife, Vanessa, were the first people to welcome me and open their home for me. I really thank you for that, Albie, because hospitality is a very important dimension of our culture. Albie is joined by someone that I hardly can just say it is Professor Achille Mbembe. I think he's one of the band leaders, if not the solo leader, of a rock band, a super rock star of critical thinking. Achille Mbembe obtained his doctoral degree at the Université Paris-Sorbonne in 1989, and subsequently obtained a DEA in political science at the DEA in political science at the Institut d'études politiques in Paris as well. Mbembe is a research fellow of history and politics at the Wits University for Social and Economic Research in Johannesburg, South Africa. He has also had appointments at Columbia University, the University of Pennsylvania, Duke University, and more and more. I mean, it is absolutely impossible to introduce people who have accomplished so much. It will be lengthy. It will be just like another panel in itself. Thank you so much, both of you, for adhering to this initiative and for making time to have this conversation. I will begin with you, Albie. You have engaged in radical activities ever since you started being a conscious young man. Can you please speak us through your experience of solidarity in your work and life in the anti-apartheid movement, and how does it play out, and what kind of similarities, for instance, you see with the situation today? Albie?
Is that all? It's everything. And I'm going to take the theme of radical solidarity very literally.
Mm-hmm.
The 7th of April, 1988, O Dia da Mulher Moçambicano. And I'm in exile in Maputo. And it's a public holiday, I'm going to the beach, talk about radical, talk about loud. So loud, I couldn't hear anything. I'm in total silence afterwards, a bomb exploding. And I'm in total utter darkness. And I hear a voice saying into the darkness, Albie, speaking Portuguese, this is Ivo Querido. You're in the Maputo Central Hospital. Your arm is in lamentable condition. You must face the future with courage. And I say into the darkness what happened, and the voice, woman's voice says, it was a car bomb. I faint, but with joy, I know I'm safe. I thought I was being kidnapped to be thrown into a South African jail, and I'm in the hands of Frelimo. And I had a total conviction, as I got better, my country would get better because I had survived that moment every freedom fighter is waiting for. Will they come for me? Will they come today? Will I be brave? And they came for me and they tried to kill me and I survived. Now I'm telling this story because Mozambique saved my life. One Mozambican died. It was a black Angolan recruited into the South African army. It put a bomb in my car under command of a white South African. And now I'm in a Maputo hospital and I'm being saved by Mozambicans. My life is being saved. And there were so many of us in exile and so many people died. In my apartment on an earlier occasion, I'm there waiting for somebody very important to arrive. It's Dimpu Hani, the wife of then Chris Hani, one of our great freedom fighters. And she's just come from Maseru, and there'd been a commando raid by white racist South Africans to try and kill her and kill her husband. And she said, we were in the room and our daughter knew, you'd always told her, when the commandos come, if there's any raid, you must dive down, dive down, dive down. And she pulled me down. Her 9-year-old daughter pulled me down, she said. And we heard them coming up the stairs and they were saying, Hani, we're coming to get you, we're coming to get you. And they went to the house, the apartment next door, and they killed the people there. And we couldn't shout, you are killing the wrong people. And then they went away. And she's telling this story to Chris Hani. I mention this because people in Lesotho died because of us. A Mozambican died because of me. There's this question of solidarity that Africa gave to us, and the solidarity that we owe to Africa is personal for me. It was literally life and death for me. It's not just a slogan, it's not just a nice thing or good to have. And these stories are unknown in our own country, in South Africa, and not even as widely known in the rest of Africa as they deserve to be. The extent to which the African continent participated in and supported our freedom struggle in South Africa and the price that they paid. I'm going to move forward some years after the bomb, and I'm back in Cape Town, and the political prisoners are being released, the exiles are returning, and I'm invited by the University of Cape Town to give an inaugural lecture. So I'm a professor extraordinary at the University of the Western Cape. My documents are there. This was the University of Struggle, the University of overwhelmingly Black people fighting against not just the racist situation in the country at large, but the extent to which they're being separated out intellectually into what was called the Bush College, a separate college for Black students, and turning that around into a site of resistance and change. And all my documents are there and my artwork went there. And I'm very associated with UWC, University of the Western Cape, but also my own university, University of Cape Town, UCT, where I got my degrees. I was part in activities against racism at UCT, and I'm invited to give an inaugural lecture. Now, most lawyers' inaugural lectures start off with some pompous phrase, about the law and the grandeur of the law. So be it. I started off with the phrase, "The beautiful ones are not yet born," a phrase that emerged in West Africa, was picked up in Zimbabwe, and now I'm bringing it back home to Cape Town. The beautiful ones are not yet born. And
the
that was
title of a famous novel by Achille Ama, Ghanaian writer. Yeah.
And that was 1991. And we're planning our new constitutional order. And in planning that new constitutional order, we're drawing on African experience, not just resisting colonialism, not just fighting imperial control, not just fighting tribalism and racialism and exploitation, but fighting also the disappointments, the setbacks. And preparing, I'm telling the people, all constitutions are based on the tension between perfectibility, which we aim for, and corruptibility, which we guard against. So it wasn't coming back with a sense of euphoria, yay, we've won, now we're in charge, we're going to run society, everything will be beautiful. Enter ye the political kingdom and all else will be given unto you, as Nkrumah said, and then he was deposed afterwards. It was that experience of Africa struggling against colonialism, against imperialism, struggling against the impact of the slave trade and the depopulation and the destruction, struggling against the Cold War, a theme that's not mentioned really enough. Big conflicts of the West and the East being imposed and fought on African soil and destroying the natural evolution of our new countries and societies in the post-independence era. But also struggling against disappointment to keep hope alive and being done through art, through thought, through ideas. So that was my first statement. The beautiful ones are not yet born. A capital B and a capital O. And I tell it today in South Africa, when there's so much dismay and so much disappointment, the beautiful ones are not yet born. We are struggling to be beautiful. We are struggling to be those ones. But the beautiful ones, we are us. It's us with all our imperfections, all the temptations, all the disappointments. We carry on striving. The second statement I made was even less likely to be heard in an inaugural legal lecture. A rich man's fart smells sweet. Ngugi ya wa Tiongo.
Yeah.
Wa Tiongo. And he liked that phrase so much, he used it 4 times in a particular novel that he wrote. And that was saying the dangers of overthrowing the old oppressor and a new class coming to take over, and induces a sense of psychophancy, of lack of critical challenge. And Ngugi knew that only too well. He's thrown into jail. Jomo Kenyatta, we demanded his release in Cape Town. Somebody whom I defended, John Unwayne, went to jail for cheering on the Mau Mau. This was in the early 1950s in Cape Town. We supported their struggle, we demanded his release. And Jomo Kenyatta's successor throws Tiongo into jail. And that whole generation of intellectuals thrown into jail. And this is an experience of Africa that I bring back with me to share with the people. That's part of that solidarity experience. Then I think of the third of 3 tales, little tales I'm telling you, parables if you like. I'm in Vienna. And I'm asked to open an exhibition of Malangatana, the great Mozambican artist. Now you can't be more Eurocentric than Vienna. It's right in the heart of Europe. And Vienna itself with this ancient Austro-Habsburg Hungarian culture. And you can't be more centered than being in a gallery at a bank. You couldn't, in that sense, be further away from Africa. And Malangitana is very anxious. He says, Albie, you speak, I don't want to speak. Now, he's a wonderful storyteller, much better than I am. But he feels intimidated by that ambience. So I start by taking people, and I show them one of his pictures. And if you want the date, it's the centenary of the birth of Pablo Picasso.
Mm-hmm.
And one of Malangitana's paintings was a painting with a very self-created style, not based on European conventions of perspective, of color, of composition, not fitting into any isms of impressionism or expressionism or anything like that. Self-created. He was put in a garage with easel, with oils, and invited by an architect, paint, create your own style. He created his own style, a very, very special, powerful style coming from inside with a marvelous natural technique. And in this picture, you have African heads and faces, and he has the head of Picasso, that famous head of Picasso in the middle. He is reappropriating. Picasso appropriated African heads to establish his particular style.
Yeah.
Now he's taking back, in exchange, Picasso's head in the middle of that picture. Very beautifully done, very, very thoughtful. In any event, Malangitana suddenly discovers you don't have to give an intellectual talk.
Mm.
You converse with the people there, so he pushes me aside, he takes over. And he speaks, one picture he says to this really correct, very intelligent, very cultivated, very interested in Africa, Viennese audience, and many of them very left-wing and very progressive, and very critical. And he says, I'm with my grandmother, we're near the Limpopo River, we can hear the hippopotamuses grunting in the background, the fire is burning, and she tells me the story, and that story is in the picture. It was total magic.
Mm.
And then he says, I just want to say to the people of Austria, thank you very much. And he's speaking almost like a formal diplomat. You are providing us with cement and with pipes for irrigation, and we appreciate that very much. He says, what in Africa do we have? All we have is a song. Now, for me, that's so beautiful.
This is so beautiful. I may just.
And it's so clever.
Yeah.
Because he's saying, you are giving us things. We
Yeah.
are giving you humanity. And then he ended up with this phrase, you give what you got to give. It's such a simple phrase, and yet it's so equalizing. Mm-hmm. It's so equalizing, and it makes it possible for me to speak to millionaires and philanthropists whose support we need for all sorts of things. I'm not with them. I don't want to belong there. I don't fit in comfortably there. I often wonder how they got their riches, but they are human beings, they are people, they have a conscience, they're part of the world. We have to find connections. You give what you have to give. So I have words to give, I have ideas to give, I have legal reasoning to give, and they have maybe support, funding, different things to give.
Yeah.
Our last and fourth story is, if you go to the Constitutional Court of South Africa, built in the heart of an old prison in Johannesburg. And you see this beautiful building that was decolonial before we even spoke about decolonization, because we wanted a building that was South African, that grew out of our struggle on a site of pain and humiliation, where Gandhi, Mandela, Luthuli, Robert Sobukwe, Winnie Mandela, Fatima Meer had all been locked up. That's where we built our court. A wonderful juxtaposition. When you think of monuments of the old, how do you deal with the old? You juxtapose, you put something new to challenge, to draw on that energy, turn it around. And we have beautiful artwork in that building. and you come into the foyer and you see one piece of artwork on the staircase of the old awaiting trial block where the prisoners were kept. There's a neon artwork and it says "A luta continua." For people who've been in Mozambique, you know it's "A luta continua." The others say "A luta continua." You can tell the difference, those who've been there and those who haven't. And we didn't choose it because it's a slogan. We chose it because it's a strong piece of art that tells a very strong story in a very affirmative way in a surprising place next to the court. So for me, these are all examples, if you like, of radical solidarity. The solidarity is not charity, although there's nothing wrong with charity, caritas in the full sense. Loving, giving is wonderful, but it's more profound than that. Solidarity based on pain, on aspiration, on hope, on torture, on violence, on resistance, on coming together, finding connections. And now we do it in the context that you expressed so beautifully. And you said nice things about me. I'm going to say nice things about you, not as an exchange. Just to say,
it's not an exchange, dear Albie, but please, I don't want to interrupt you.
Yes, but to say, having you coming with your sensibility from another part of our continent, another part not just far away in distance, but a separate colonization, French language, culture, even your enemies, if you like, enemies inverted commas, were different, cut off from us. And you bring something very expressive and very intense and very confident. And you make us aware of what this continent means. It's not just a physical space of people of similar historical experiences. It's a space of endeavor, of challenge, of critique. And I love it.
Thank you.
Deep, not just you, but I love it with a deep, deep, special love. When we get guidance from elsewhere in Africa, when we get leadership from elsewhere in Africa, in the most sophisticated intellectual sphere, because there's a terrible arrogance down here. Somebody, Para Jordan, said we are in danger of becoming the Yankees of Africa.
Oh,
and
we hope not.
Everything, we want you.
We hope not. Thank you, Albie. Thank you so much. We hope not. I want to sort of connect to something that you said and that I think really speaks to Achille's practice in a large extent. You know, this idea of a fundamental cultural and political solidarity that all countries of the continent have always provided to each other, and particularly from a South African perspective. I mean, I recall that when I moved to Dakar in the mid-90s, it's then that I realized that the very first ANC office in West Africa was established in Senegal. So putting it to you, Achille, I know that it is very clear that your entire work is really put into dissecting the political structures and the social meaning that are coming out of it from the African continent. And I'm also very aware of your fundamental Pan-African mind and spirit. I mean, you coined the beautiful term Afropolitan, which is the definition of the so-called New African, if you want. So as opposed to Aikweama, who Albie actually evoked with the term, the beautiful ones are not yet born. I think that we are a generation of people who believe that beautiful ones are born every day, luckily. So Achille, may I just ask you, how do you see the current times speak to the historical kind of context of solidarity, and particularly through the lens of all these movements and all these initiatives that I listed before? Do you see any correlation? Do you see a moment for us to seize as a potential kind of push forward and action and change? How do you experience that?
First of all, I would like to thank Koyo. I could have borrowed all the words Albie said about you. I won't do that, but you know how many of us here in South Africa, in the rest of the continent, and in other parts of the world, you know what we feel for you. And I'm very grateful for Albie and Vanessa to have opened the door to you when you landed in Cape Town. And my hope is that that door will remain open as long as both Albie and Vanessa and yourself are alive. When you asked me to speak with Albie in the context of this event this afternoon, I didn't think twice. I said yes immediately, both for you, for the museum, of course, and for Albie. And we have heard what the introductory remarks he has just shared with us. I also was intrigued by the title of this event, Radical Solidarity. And I thought that it was more than topical for three reasons. First of all, because our present, as far as I can see, is characterized by what seems to me to be a redrawing of the global map, a renewed competition for the control of the earth. The control of the earth at a time when the earth has never been in so much danger as it is now. At a time also when the earth has never been in so much need of repair and care as it is now, partly because of the dramatic ecological crisis we all face, which is probably the biggest challenge to human existence on this planet. So to put on the table the question of solidarity in that context is more than topical. The second reason has to do with what seems to me to be the increasing divergence and polarization that is affecting our world. Divergence and polarization, which we see not only in the continuing inequalities, global inequalities we witness, but also in the attendant resurgence of racial antagonisms. I don't need to remind us of what has happened recently with the killing of George Floyd, before him, after him, and all that is going on around the matter of racism. The third reason is the growing concern with insulation from risks and dangers, beginning with the human body. Here I refer to what seems to be emerging out of our current situation of COVID-19, when the body, the individual body, becomes once again, let's say, a potential carrier of risk, not only for the person's body, but also for, let's say, the body politics, the body social at large. So the question of solidarity in that context becomes absolutely critical. Now, Albie started with the story of, let's say, an instantiation of radical solidarity with his story, which implied, of course, exile in the sense that one has to leave one's home, the place where one was born, partly because one's home has become uninhabitable and hospitable, and therefore one is looking for a place of refuge and hospitality and care. Albie also referred to the struggle. And in the story he told us, the struggle is, let's say, its ultimate definition is suspended on, in this case, matters of life and death. And he wakes up in the hospital and he is grateful that he's still alive. He could have gone the other way. So solidarity in this case is decided precisely at that edge on matters of life and death, of giving death in the case of the enemies who are pursuing him, and receiving death, being at that edge where and when matters of life and death are decided. So solidarity, radical solidarity, in this case, if I understand Albie's well, is this willingness to tie one's life with the life of the others. And in tying one's life with the life of the others, recognize in so doing a kind of mutual debt, the fact that we owe something to each other. It doesn't matter where we were born, where we are coming from, where we are going. There is a kind of originary debt that connects us, which we are interpellated to address. And we cannot not respond to the interpellation. We cannot wait. It is urgent. It has to be done. It has to be done now. It has to be done in pursuit of life, with the purpose of extending bonds of life and bonds of care and bonds of mutual protection and reciprocity. That's how I understand the concept of radical solidarity you ask us to think about. Now you're asking me, Allende, is there anything we can learn from Pan-Africanism, which would, let's say, equip us to embrace this type of definition of solidarity now and reopen new spaces of hope and possibilities for the African continent, but also for the world at large, the planet at large, which I referred to early on. It seems to me that is the challenge. What is it that in the larger history of Black life, of African life, is there something there that, are there resources there, moral resources, intellectual resources, political resources, aesthetic resources that we can harness as we face a new cycle of life on the planet? That is the way I understand your question. Now, the response is, of course, yes. Because what was Pan-Africanism ultimately? what kind of question was it bringing on the table? And how was it responding to it? Pan-Africanism is, as Albie suggested, fundamentally a history of resistance and struggle. It is a history of hope, and it is a history of possibility. Those three elements. We don't understand anything about Pan-Africanism if we do not put at its center the question of struggle, the question of hope, and the question of possibility. It is a response, I would say, to the question, what does it mean to inhabit the world as a person of African descent? And when I say a person of African descent, I'm not only saying as a Black person.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that.
Person of African descent in, if you want, the paleontological sense of the term, in the sense that this is the cradle of humanity. What does it mean to be human, inhabit the world as a human in the world of the now? That is the fundamental question Pan-Africanism raised in those years, in the 19th century, in 20th century, and now. Even more so now that our fate as human beings is entangled with the fate of non-humans, of all living entities, on a planet which, as I argued, is in dire need of repair. That's how I see it. And my response is yes. If you want to know more, then let's go ahead. And
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, for us at the museum, you know, it was just so, I mean, the experience of the pandemic revealed many things for us that we knew. I mean, it's like on many levels. It's on a individual level, on an institutional level, on a national level, and in an effort to really engage with the reality that is in front of us. First of all, I mean, the museum just came out of a crisis. We were just barely coming out of the crisis, and we entered another crisis. So that's one thing. The second thing for the museum, why it is so important, and we find it radical. I mean, one can discuss about the terminology, but that's not the point. The point is that we found ourselves at the moment on an institutional level, on the political level, on many other levels in society, where we absolutely have to engage, think, design other ways of working and other ways of relating. I mean, nobody can continue like this. The pandemic, we didn't necessarily need the pandemic to realize that we are on overrun. And I'm not talking about the museum, but the world in general, and particularly in African countries. So the overrun is somehow also calling for a reboot. But at the same time, we know that, and if we talk, I mean, you both mentioned identities in various ways and in different ways. But we also know that identities are very loose sort of systems of being, so to speak, if one even can talk about system of being, because they are really not informed by reason, so to speak. It's a lot of fiction and it's a lot of passion around what we call identities. That's one. On the other hand, the artistic and creative sector, the spiritual, I call, space of reading the world and translating and interpreting the world through artworks is very much part of what are called sort of diminished understanding in relation to the written word. So for us, it becomes, for me, my generation of people, and who fundamentally think in a Pan-African way. I like to say that I belong to every corner of this continent, just like every corner of this continent belongs to me. And this is not just a slogan. I mean, this is a part of my life, my identity, my practice, my trajectory. It becomes urgent for us to also use this moment to really work towards this rebooting, because it is as stressing and as unsettling and as uncertain that the pandemic is throwing everyone in, and also the overwhelmingness of this uncertainty, the global bankruptcy, basically, of the idea of an order, so to speak, of an idea of an institution, is so obvious. So because of this, the individual greed, but also institutional greed, you know. So it's really, I'm sure, I don't know if I'm totally making sense now, because I know that I'm digressing a lot. But what I basically want to say is that we can only get out of this if we understand that there is no big, there is no small, there is no rich, there is no poor, so to speak, and that the interdependency of life and politics and work and everything that you want are fundamental to our, you know, experience in the world. I don't know if you can relate to that, both of you.
I'd like to throw a question to you. I don't know if it's permissible.
You can, of course you
now,
can.
something you said in your very, very beautiful introduction, you said we must be humble and we mustn't be arrogant. But we must be humble, but we must be proud. What's the difference between pride and arrogance? And how can you be radical if you are humble? If you are humbled, you're not radical, you're submissive.
No. I think that's a very good point, Albie. I totally disagree. I don't think humility is equal submission. And I think I'm not a native English speaker. I can try to explain it from the French, because your French, you say, I mean, there is orgueil and there is fierté, and fierté, and there is also dignité. So pretension, so to speak, pride, and dignity. So because it all runs more or less sort of in the same kind of vein, I think the way we understand institutional humility at Zeitz MOCAA, and me also personally, is the sense of respect of the other, and it's a sense of also providing room for others to exist, and it's a sense of knowing some of the limits, well knowing that transgression of limits can be a good thing, but it has to be in the right moment at the right time. And it's also a sense of not being self-absorbed and self-referential. So the museum in its inception was very self-absorbed, very self-referential, and kind of working in a vacuum, or thinking in a vacuum. So when we talk about institutional humility, this is what we mean. You know, we mean that we are many, in a given field, and there is not necessarily anyone that is more intelligent, better than the other, but because we are all working towards the same goal, and this goal is serving art and artists and providing meaning to the society. So this is what I see around humility.
And your pride, what is the source of your pride?
Well, the source of your pride, you mean now institutionally or personally? I mean, institutionally.
Both.
Albie, you're exposing me now. I think I should be the one moderating you.
No, you are speaking so beautifully. And I think it's wonderful for all of us to hear these things.
Yeah, I mean, my main source of pride professionally is really the privilege this profession gives us to work with outstanding minds, artists, and intellectuals like you and Achille. So my sense of, I take a lot of pride from this proximity. I feel spoiled every time I have the privilege to benefit from, you know, the knowledge and experience of artists and others. So I take a lot of pride in that. And right personally, but you know, I don't want to get into my personal stuff on this stage, Albie, you know me. Achille, what do you think?
I would like to comment a bit on a term you have used twice, or even more than that. You have spoken about the term to reset, mm-hmm. or to reboot. Mm-hmm. And if I followed you carefully, you were trying to associate these terms with the life of institutions. In this case, MOCAA, or more generally cultural institutions, museums, but also, of course, other spaces of expressive creativity. Clearly, the injunction to reset is probably a very important, one of the most important demands we have heard of late, coming in particular from younger generations. We are on the cusp of, it seems to me, of a major generational change, at least in the continent. We see it here in South Africa too. Some of the most decisive struggles we are already embroiled in, and which are likely to determine the future of our nations and of the continents, have to do with the struggle between generations, both in a demographic and biological sense, and of course, cultural sense. So it seems to me that those who are coming behind us are carrying a major injunction. Everything has to be reset. That's the meaning of the call to decolonize, for instance. Museums have to be reset, they have to be decolonized. Societies have to be reset, they have to be decolonized. Political systems, the same thing. And of course, economic systems. Because so far, they have led, if not to an impasse, a cul-de-sac, Albie's reference to Ngugi and Aikwe-Arma. In any case, they have not opened up a space for, to use an ANC slogan, a better life for all. I have to say that I'm not a member of the ANC, but look, it's part of the vocabulary available to all of us. I hijack it provisionally. So we have to maybe pause a little bit and think a bit more about these injunction to reset. As far as it concerns institutions, it seems to me that we have to rethink institutional life in a context of a broader project, which is what? To rebuild Africa as a home, and I use the term home, for humanity at large. All attempts at resetting institutions and everything else, which do not pay attention or take seriously that project, will fall short of, it seems to me, what younger generations are demanding. Now, to rebuild Africa as a home for the humanity at large, we have to somewhat believe that the narrative of African life is unfinished. It is still to be completed. That's what Ngugi, Aikwe-Arma, and many others have been saying. It's not finished. It's not closed. History is not over. It's still open. And in order to open it even further, the completion of the African narrative will necessitate some form or another of an extensive rewriting of Africa's self-understanding. And in the process of the way in which we understand the world, what is it? What is our place in it? What's our role in it? Do we have some specific role to play in the unfolding history of the world? What is it? What is our responsibility vis-a-vis it? And this is, I mean, the privileged field of cultural expression.
Mm-hmm.
But if this becomes the theme of our cultural creation,
Mm-hmm.
we have so much to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Because, mind you, our archive, the African archive, has hardly been explored
Mm-hmm.
in every single discipline. Take music. We have hardly used, I would say, 15% of the musical reservoir of the continent.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing in terms of theater, the disciplines of representation. How do we exhibit? How do we represent?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing in terms of artisanal craft.
Mm-hmm.
So the archive is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we are forgetting parts of it, but there's still enough there that we can harness, provided that we proceed to some form or another of rewriting of our self-understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we can build therefore on our assets. To reset museums and institutions, we have to know what our assets are, not only what our needs are. The discourse of development talks about the needs.
Mm-hmm.
We have to shift it and start talking about assets.
Exactly.
Assets simply material. Lastly, we have to open this continent to itself.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean moving quickly or immediately to the kind of federal state we dreamt about since the 19th century. It's an old dream. But there are a number of things that can be done to make sure that no African is a foreigner in Africa. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that that is key. Mm-hmm. And if we do not subscribe to the idea that no African can be made a foreigner in the continent, then let's just forget about it.
Yes.
Let's forget about it and move on to something else.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you touched on many points that are really key to us. I mean, I always see the artistic space or the creative space as a kind of of a continent of its own, you know, because it's a place, it's a site of proposals, it's a site of conversation, it's also a site of some form and some sort of equality, because the hierarchies are less pronounced, in the sense that the proposition, the artistic and intellectual proposition, really gives this kind of open space for imagination and for rethinking, and for, you know, even fictionalized, you know, the fiction sometimes might be more important than the reality. So because it can really translate ideas and imagination in different ways. So I definitely think that the cultural space is that space where, I mean, that's why I referred, for instance, to the artwork by Mesha Gaba. I mean, I don't know if we can show that slide again. I mean, it is for me quite a groundbreaking work in the imagination of a field. I mean, the same kind of political imagination that has been produced for the continent since over 100 years, and that continues to be the catalyst of multiple generation after generation, because I mentioned earlier that we are having a transgenerational conversation. I mean, with our elder Albie, I am of a slightly younger generation. So this desire is so clear. And I think that an institution like the museum, like Zeitz MOCAA, can become a laboratory of, you know, this experimentation, of this political translation, of these dreams that we have. You also mentioned something else that I think is really, it's quite telling. This culture of talking about needs, I translate it into the culture of talking about absence, as opposed to a culture of talking about presence. Our experience, our African Black experience, has led us constantly to believe that exactly that we have needs, and that we don't have assets, and that we don't have wishes. Whereas, you know, we all know how rich we are. So my question to both of you, which relates to the initial invitation to this panel, how do you think, beyond the multiple manifestations that many artists and creative people and thinkers like you have provided, how do you think we can reclaim that, how can I call it, that wealth, that cultural and political wealth, and put it into action for real societal, cultural, and political transformation? And in a digressive way, within that same question, as a kind of a slight footnote, how does that, can that be implemented and played out within an institution like a museum? Because I strongly believe that we cannot do a museum in Cape Town like a museum is done in New York or in Paris. We definitely have to hack the format and make it work for us in many ways. It's...
Achille, you go first, please.
Okay.
It's an extensive question, I know.
No, it is. But I'll try to pick it up where you left it. I think, I mean, a museum is not just a big building. I mean, however beautiful the building is. It's not enough to just have a building. It's not enough to simply locate the museum in an appealing city, although that's important. The museum has to draw from existing cultural power that exists in that location, which is not simply to be found in formal institutions. Cultural power is produced, most of it, in fact, outside of formal institutions. And we have to go and find those sites of creation of cultural power precisely in those locations that are sometimes outside of the formal grid. And this applies to MOCAA as to a museum in Dakar or any other cultural institution that is preoccupied with the kind of perspective we have been talking about, to become a laboratory of what is coming and to become an incubator of new energies that will facilitate our transition to a new generation of projects, new generation of dreams, ways of thinking, of doing, of assembling, of composing African life in a world, as I said, which is in need of repair, in need of care, and that is under threat. So in that sense, it seems to me that, as you yourself have seen it, I mean, with the experiment of raw material in Dakar, which you made it happen. I hope one day somebody will write the history of raw material. What one needs is a museum which is at the same time an anti-museum. Don't ask me to specify exactly what I mean by that. I'm trying to open up kind of new imagination of the museum. So a museum which is at the same time an anti-museum, which is, as you put it, a radical laboratory, which is a space of radical openness, because that's what experimentation is all about. It's not about the making of boundaries. It's about the opening of boundaries. A museum that is a museum based on the principle of deborderization, because I believe that borders are the biggest obstacle to our emancipation in the continent and to our releasing our innate capacity to take care of the world and to take care of the planet. So I believe that if a project we have to have, it must be a project of deborderization. In fact, when you invited me, I thought that you would ask me to speak during the last panel, which, if I remember well, the title of which is "Why So Many Borders?" So it's to diminish the number of borders.
Yeah, there is a panel on mobility and borders and how our African bodies move around that on Thursday, definitely. Yeah.
But I'm referring here both to physical borders, but I'm using an extended concept of borders. And I'm arguing for deborderization and calling for a new understanding of the museum, which would itself be without borders and whose major interventions would aim precisely at unlocking the border mentality which we have inherited from centuries of slavery and colonialism.
Yes, it's so beautiful. Albie, your take before we open to the floor, because I think we have quite a wide audience that is burning to converse with you and to ask a few questions.
Okay, about the museum and its role in transformation. I'll ask the question that Bertolt Brecht asked: who built the pyramids? Who built the museum? And it was a silo. It was put up by people hidden from the stories. Physically, it was manned, literally manned, and filled with people shoveling grain to go to Europe, completely alienated from the process of the world. If the museum as a building can see itself as a huge installation, if you like, installation in history, and bring to life the ghosts, they are so forgotten, they don't even haunt the place, allow them to haunt the place, and connect up with the ghosts in our world around there who work so hard, unseen and unnoticed and unremarked upon in our cities. That's one response to the question you're asking. The second is Africa. I was very moved by Achille's comments on, I think, the paleontological view of Africanness. You can't go further back than that. But it's a continent of origins, but it's a continent of discovery. And the fact that we haven't been, as a continent, almost over-researched. In England, they do research on shipbuilding in the 13th century because they can't find topics to research on. They're looking for topics. People are in search of a PhD. Our continent is bubbling with potential research projects because there's so much that hasn't been converted into pages, into knowledge, into information. It gives us a huge opportunity to discover our continent ourselves. And the museum can play a very important role in discovery, not just in theoretical, logical, data terms, but in terms of emotion and passion. And thirdly, it can be a place of fun. The fun you get from juxtaposition. And the whole point about discoveries is you don't know what's going to be discovered. If you knew what's going to be discovered, it's not a discovery. So you've got to take your chances. You have to risk. You have to open up with hope. There might be collisions. There might be nothing. There might be failures. And there might be beautiful stars that have never been imagined before. Go for that.
Thank you so much. I think one of the things, I don't know how you have experienced the lockdown in the last few months. One of the things that I experienced and that sort of come out as an insight is the fundamental need of each other's energy. And that one of the fundamental aspects of our human experience is to produce energy, to share energy and receive energy. So in the lack of the possibility of assembly and the lack of the possibility of gathering, and well knowing that artistic practice, not just museum work, artistic practice is a fundamental practice of gathering, of assembling, of celebrating, of coming together. I have to say that we are very unclear, uncertain about how this pandemic will really also transform that human activity, which is fundamental for our existence. And because we certainly cannot continue, meeting on Zoom like this. We need to see each other. We need to be in front of artworks. We need to exchange with artists. We need to eat together and laugh together and so on. So on this note, I'm getting a lot of indications that we have to open to the floor. I'm speaking to our amazing back office technical team, Tiffany and Michael. Can you share some of the questions that are in the pipeline? Michael? Tiffany? Okay. They are not answering. Okay, there is a question to Achille. To what extent the major museums in Europe, the US, or Asian capitals are not deborderized? Do you want to take that one quickly, Achille? Did you hear that?
Yes, I did hear it. I mean, look, the major, let's say, if we take in particular anthropological museums, those museums where some of the artifacts, African artifacts, for instance, are deposited, they always had what I would say is an ambivalent history, in the sense that they pretended to be deborderized. They pretended to reach out to the world beyond Europe as such. That's why they are harboring, so to say, artifacts coming from elsewhere. So in that sense, they cross one form or another of a frontier, and they bring to us that which, by definition, is coming from elsewhere, is coming from afar. And yet, in the same movement, in the same process, they bring closer to us what pertains to the elsewhere. They reinstitute a border. They reinstitute a border between them and us and the others. It's a lethal border, to be clear, because it started as a border between those humans who are like us and those humans who are not like us, who are defined by generic lack, if you want. There's something missing in them, which makes them not our exact equivalents. There's something fundamental missing in them, which makes it such that we let's say we grew up and they remained children. Whole ideology of animism and so forth and so on. So in that sense, they do not really conform to what I call the deborderized museum. And it's for that reason that I imagine museums in our continent to become, if you want, let me just use that polemical term, to become African insofar as they will embody in their practices, in their concept, in the forms of exhibitions, in all of that, the principles of an anti-museum. So that would be my rather complex response.
We have another question from Yolandi van der Heide to Achille Mbembe. Please speak to the role of museums, art institutions in response to climate crisis and towards climate justice.
Hello?
Yes.
And
that was a question for Professor Mbembe.
Yeah, after that, I think there are many questions for Achille, but I think we have to sort of curate them. I think we should absolutely maybe link it with the question from Abdul Malik Simon. Hello, Malik, who is in the audience. This is what I wanted to pick up. Okay, go ahead. Michael?
Yes. Taking off from your new research agenda on paradoxes of African regions, what kinds of antagonisms and divergences are necessary aspects of the solidity of particular political, human, and territorial arrangements where solidarity ensues from the very prospect that people could and might go their own way?
So there is a question about museum in the relation to climate change or climate crisis, but also there is Malik in a nutshell is talking about sort of real solid, reinvention of the self, which is part of your writing about the rewriting of ourselves, the rewiring. I think it's quite interesting.
Okay, the first question, I'm not just talking about climate change. I think climate change is a rather tamed concept. What we are facing is much more than just a crisis of the climate. We are facing a crisis that is ecological, that is environmental, that is, let's say, transforming completely the parameters of the biosphere. And if nothing is done about it, what that crisis is challenging is the very possibility of human existence on Earth. So it's something absolutely fundamental and serious. And I have to say that here in South Africa, we do not seem to understand the full measure of what humanity is facing. Second, it's a threat which doesn't need visas, just like COVID-19. COVID-19 doesn't need any visa to go where it wants to go, which means that it's a planet, it has planetary dimensions. And I have been trying since Koyo started inciting us to speak, to introduce this planetary dimension in our debates, and the responsibilities which can be deduced from the emergence of this new planetary consciousness, which is not, a village consciousness, which is not the consciousness of a region, of a nation or territorial state, which has to do with the world at large, if you want. So this shift to the planetary, it seems to me to become more and more the driving concept behind most reconfigurations of not only museal institutions or other cultural institutions, but life on Earth as such. We started with those decisive questions of futures of life, I think that everything has to be reorganized, reset, rebooted in relation to the futures of life as the key philosophical, political question of the 21st century. I say it for one reason. Not long ago, we used to be worried about the origins of life. Where does it start from? How does it evolve? How can it be sustained? There have been a fundamental shift with the advent of what is called the Anthropocene, the ecological crisis we are in, which is human-made. There's a shift. The biggest question are no longer how is it that life begins. The biggest question more and more is how does it end? How does it end? So it seems to me that we have to, the shift has to occur with these bigger questions and Africa has something to say about it. Africa being, if you want, at the center of where life, in any case, human life began. It began here. We being at the center of where it began, we should have something to say about how it can be sustained, what are its possible futures, and if it has to end, how should it end? And these are really serious matters, not only political, but also intellectual, artistic, so forth and so on. So the museum has to be reinvented from within that broader, broad parameter. Now, Malik, you should invite Malik next time.
We would love that. Malik, the invitation is out there anytime. Just accept.
So you bring us Malik here and then he will talk to us about most of this. But just one quick thing, because Albie has been waiting for some time now. Malik, the way I see it is that historically, when we read the history of our continent, the ways in which we formed societies, the ways in which we made culture, the artifacts we produced, the forms of social belonging, forms of economic life. I don't mean they were the same everywhere, but there were major dynamics which were articulated around movement, or what we call nowadays mobility. Mobility was at the center of everything. In fact, contrary to conceptions of space, let's say in Europe and elsewhere, movement is that which created space and territories. It was not the other way around. We bought into the other paradigm in which space creates mobility or allows for mobility with the advent of colonialism. We had an entirely different paradigm of the relationship between mobility and space. If we had spaces at all, they were always mobile spaces. If we had borders at all, they were always porous borders. Long distance interactions, at least in West Africa, were absolutely the basic foundation of everything. And people have not forgotten about it. There's still a long memory of that. Colonialism didn't erase everything. It bombarded everything and turned everything into fragments. And what people are doing now, and we learn it from your own work, is how to assemble constantly all these fragments, put them together in order to re-engineer agency. And this being the case, questions of identity, which were raised early on by Koyo, are not as dramatic as they may sound. Because let's say, in African traditional pre-colonial systems of thought, relation is much more important than ontology. People don't ask who I am. People ask, who am I related to? What is it that I may become? So the key antagonism has to do with this question of becoming and the struggles around becoming. That's how I see it. It's not about identity. That's my quarrel with identity politics, if you want, but we shouldn't be bringing it here.
Thank you so much, Achille. But I would like to give Albie the opportunity to give his take on all these points that we went through now, because we are over time, but maybe you can have concluding words about that, Albie.
First of all, huge thanks, not to you, they're even bigger to you that come later, but to Achille for expounding so powerfully, so intensely, the importance of the survival factor, survival of humanity, and the special role that Africa can play, and identify fully with that. He speaks philosophically, I speak experientially, and I think it might make an interesting contrast. Because I remember when I came back from exile in 1990, and I was asked to speak to a green movement in Cape Town, and I was irritated. We're fighting for freedom, we're fighting for justice, we're fighting against oppression, and you want us to deal with trees and elephants and rhinos. But I was irritated more than that, because I felt there's something there. My head is so full, my heart is so full. I don't want to go there, it's too much for me. In any event, I agreed to speak. And my talk was entitled, "Do You Have to Be White to Be Green?" And at that stage, I was worried, this idea of saving the white rhino, when there was so much misery and injustice and unfairness in this country, seemed all wrong. And yet we can't abandon the earth, we can't abandon the animal kingdom, we can't abandon nature. So I was irritated because I'm torn. And the resolution for me was actually to see the power of seeing ourselves as inhabitants of nature in terms of recreating South Africa, in terms, if you like, of a new constitutional vision. And the feeling that in African culture, the connection with the soil, the rivers, the rocks, the plants, the bark is so powerful. The ancestors being buried in a place, it's not just a cadaver in a site, it's almost a spiritual connection with the past. And that's a deep, profound ecological, spiritual, existential kind of commitment and vision of the world that's so powerful. And I was thinking of Afrikaners in South Africa. When they're conquered by the British, they feel overwhelmed. They're driven off the lands, their farmsteads are burnt, the women, children go into concentration camps. They feel totally uprooted and displaced. And beautiful literature comes out about animals, the animal kingdom. We learned these things in school. The lion family, the white ant, the baboons. And it's a resort to a connection with the earth, with the soil. That was very, very powerful and profound. It was a depopulated, non-human world, but a world of animation, a world of vitality. And even the Brits, who don't come out so well in this respect, Jock of the Bushveld, the story of the man's love for the dog, a feeling for nature, these could be binding factors in our country. Absolutely. At a very deep and very profound level. So it's not simply the threat of extinction that should be guiding us, important and fundamental that is, but the connections with the earth, with the soil, with the bark, with living things that can help us to connect with each other, that I feel complements exactly the things that Achille has so presented.
Thank you so much, Albie. I'm so heartbroken that we have to stop it, because I have so many notes here about energy, about memory, about the idea of movement and mobility and space and the porousness of borders that I would love to respond to, but we don't have the time today anymore. But the week is long, so everybody can come back every day. And because some of these conversations, I mean, some of these thematic will certainly reemerge in the subsequent days. I've been notified by the back office that I absolutely have to end this. It is such a pleasure to share this stage with you, to discuss this, and also think together towards what can be done and what we should be doing. As I said in the beginning, we are working towards a catalog of ideas, and there are many ideas that arose this afternoon, and we will continue, because I strongly believe that Zeitz MOCAA as an initiative cannot be a museum like any other. So we have to make it together. And this is what this program is also about. And it will, feed into a participatory resource that we will put in place for everybody to participate. Thank you very much, dear Albie. Lots of love back home. Thank you very much, my brother, dear Achille. Lots of love back home as well. And I have to hand over the floor to the team, because the program continues with the performance of Aaron Gonsalves, a Cape Town-based artist. And we continue later with a reading of Ben Okri, by Sachs, who's an assistant curatorial assistant at the museum. And tomorrow we continue the marathon with a focus on printed matter, text, language, and transmission of knowledge. Don't miss that, because there will be an amazing panel of professionals, young and older. And there will also be a conversation between Françoise Vergès and Frida Ekoto, and the screening of an amazing resource that I'm so fond of, developed by Zahia Rahmani, an incredible Algerian art historian, speaking about the seismography of struggles towards a global history of critical and cultural journals, gathering journals of struggles and solidarity dating back to the late 19th century. So stay with us throughout the whole week, and thank you very much for joining this afternoon. Bye.
Thanks, Koyo. Thanks, Albie.
Thank you, Achille.
Hello to Vanessa.
Back office, what are we supposed to do? We just have to hang up, huh? Michael, just tell us what we need to do.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you
Cool.
very much. Bye.
Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, for those that are still around, as Koyo has mentioned, we do still have a special performance at 6:30 by Haroon Gonsalves, and a reading at 8 p.m. by Sachs. Thank you.